Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. Before I start this video today, let me start by making something clear. This will be a very controversial list. Like most rankings of anything you'll see anywhere, you're probably not going to 100% agree with me. And browsing Star Wars rankings online, I didn't completely agree with any of them either. That being said, let's get started. In last place is easily Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. Before I go into rant here, let me just say, this had potential to be great. If I had just read the summary of this movie without seeing how it was filmed, I would have probably thought that it would be like a top 5 Star Wars movie for me. But that is not at all the case. The execution of this movie was, how can I say this nicely, very, very not good. And it was a bit of a casting problem as well, especially with young Anakin. I really hate to beat up on young Jake Lloyd like this because he's probably gotten a lot of hate in his career, and he seems like a nice kid. But everything he said in this movie just came out really, really cringy.
It's on automatic pilot! Look! There they are! That's where the autopilot's taking us!
Especially in that ending scene when he says one of the most cringiest lines that will ever exist in any Star Wars movie.
Now this is pod racing!
And you have Jar Jar Binks, Newt Gunray, Rune Hayako, which I'm not the biggest fan of either. And I can say that the Duel of the Fates lightsaber scene, at least, was awesome. And especially Darth Maul. I mean, he was one of the greatest characters to ever exist for Star Wars. And he was only in the movie for like 10 lines worth before he gets cut in half. So I don't know. I just didn't find a lot of solid moments in this film. Number 8 is Star Wars Attack of the Clones Episode 2. There are only 2 major issues with this movie, but they are very major. Hayden Christensen's acting was very, very whiny, and it didn't make me want to root for him. I mean, of course, in the end, you obviously don't want to root for Darth Vader, but you'd think they would want you to in this movie when he's still supposed to be a good guy. Every time his character comes on screen in this movie, I almost groan. The other issue is the overall story wasn't very interesting for me, especially the scenes on Geonosis. So why is it better than Episode 1? Well, it has a lot of cool scenes, such as Kamino and the Fets and the opening speeder chase scene. And at least the film was executed as best it could be given the script that the writers wrote, which I wasn't a huge fan of. But at least they were able to pack some cool scenes in there. At number 7 is Star Wars The Last Jedi, the most hated Star Wars movie of them all. My review for this one is quite simple. There were some great scenes, such as some of it was very boring, such as Rey and Luke's extremely long interaction on Octo and the entire Cantobite sequence. Actually, come to think of it, that was more than boring. That was borderline intolerable. And of course, there's that scene. I don't think George Lucas ever wanted to team up with Christopher Reeve, and when that happens in Star Wars, it is not a top 8 movie. But the great scenes were actually some of my favorites that have ever existed in Star Wars, believe it or not, and they save it from being in the bottom 2. At number 6 is The Rise of Skywalker. I really liked this movie when I saw it on opening night in the theater, and I thought everything was done really well. And for the most part, after rewatching it, I still think it's underrated. But I was able to see some of the flaws in the movie that flew over my head watching it the first time, probably because I hadn't seen a new Star Wars movie in a year and a half, and the excitement got to me. One big problem with this movie is that there is so much action going on, and I really feel like some of it should have been in The Last Jedi. It was one crash bang boom scene after another, and the transition between Rian Johnson's directing of Episode 8 and J.J. Abrams' directing of this film wasn't very clean. However, if we're disregarding The Last Jedi, I was a big fan of the storyline of this movie. I liked the adventure theme that it had to it. And the way that J.J. Abrams directed his 2 Star Wars movies, I really liked. More on that later. And I personally didn't think the ending of this movie was that bad, while a lot of other people did. And while I do agree that it wasn't the greatest end to the entire Skywalker saga, I thought it was a great ending to the sequel trilogy. At number 5 is Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. Feel free to find me on this one, but first let me say, there is a big gap between number 6 and number 5, and there's not that big of a gap between number 5 and number 4. As great as this movie is, there were a couple of tiny problems that keep it from being the best. Once again, I don't care for Hayden Christensen's acting as much as some others. That being said, this is much better than Episode 2 because I think he was fantastic once he turned to the dark side, so maybe he works better as a bad guy for me, I don't know. But there were so many great scenes in this movie, including my personal favorite lightsaber battle, the Coruscant battle scene with Mace Windu and Darth Sidious.
It's treason, then.
And the ending that was done perfectly. I really, really enjoyed that. Overall, I'd say the biggest problem with this movie is that I'm just not a big fan of the overall feel that the prequels have. I don't know, there's just something there that I don't particularly care for. Maybe it's a mix of the characters and the directing style, but still, this is a huge step up from the first two. At number 4 is Episode 7, The Force Awakens. One of the main reasons that this movie is so high up on the list is because it's always been nostalgic for me. It was the first Star Wars movie that I saw on the big screen, obviously, and actually the first live-action movie that I saw in the theater as well. Now, I understand that a lot of the plot lines were already used in A New Hope, and I happen to be a big fan of that movie, so it's not all that bad. And the way that they were able to fit in some original storylines, too, was awesome. And I thought that the way that they introduced the new characters and were able to weave the story into it, that was also great. Suspense was there all the way through, and it actually made me emotional some parts, especially, spoiler alert here, although it shouldn't be a problem since you've had 6 years to watch this. My personal favorite, or at least one of them, Han Solo, is killed off, but I wasn't mad at them for doing this at all, because it just gave me all the more hatred for Kylo Ren, and I can now say one of my least favorite parts of The Rise of Skywalker was when he was redeemed. After killing off one of the best and fan-favorite characters, you cannot be redeemed. I did not understand how they allowed that to happen. But one more reason why this, Episode 7, is indeed the best Star Wars movie of the 2010s, they actually managed to put in some decent comedy, and I found myself laughing multiple times throughout it. I've seen it over 15 times, and every time it's unbelievably good. It's probably the most underrated movie of all time. At number 3 is Episode 6, Return of the Jedi. I did nothing but rave about the last film, so why is it not in the top 3? Because you cannot beat the original trilogy. If there were 3 movies I wish I could watch for the first time again, I would pick these every time. It was very hard to pick between the top 2 for which one was better, but I didn't have any trouble putting this at number 3, even though it's still awesome. The only thing about this movie that could have been done a little bit better was that the Endor battle was a tad bit unrealistic when a bunch of Ewoks were able to defeat imperially trained stormtroopers. But the rest of this movie is excellent. I love the bounty hunter disguises at the beginning to free Han Solo of the Carbonite. The Sarlacc pit was amazing as well, and it has the classic lightsaber duel, the second Death Star chase, and the emotional moment with Luke and his father at the end, when he sacrifices himself to save his son and finally becomes good again. Once again, these 3 movies are all top-notch, and there's got to be a third place. Okay, here is where surely somebody is going to disagree with me, and I really wish I didn't have to rank the top 2, but I do. At number 2 is Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. There are so many iconic moments in this movie, between the Hoth scene with the AT-ATs, Yoda lifting the X-Wing on Dagobah, meeting Lando on Cloud City, the Carbonite scene, and, of course...
No, I am your father.
Not to mention the Imperial March being played for the first time, and the Force theme to end off the movie, making you want to see it all over again. I especially love the character development that goes on with all the main characters, especially Han and Leia near the end. Just the overall vibe that these movies give out is purely amazing. Now, before I reveal my number 1 pick, keep in mind that the movies in the original trilogy are all in my top 10 movies of all time, probably even top 5. They'd be mixed in with Groundhog Day, E.T., Back to the Future, etc., there. And this movie is just absolutely awesome, but I love number 1 even more. Number 1 is the original Star Wars A New Hope. My top 10 movies may change over time, but I can guarantee you that this, or maybe Empire, will always be my number 1 movie of all time. Probably. This movie is just perfect. It has so many iconic moments, From the opening chase scene to the lookout of Tatooine's sons to the trash compactor to the first lightsaber battle to the final Death Star battle, it is no surprise that my favorite movie scene of all time would come from my favorite movie, and that is when Han Solo changes his mind at the last second, saves Luke from being shot down, and allows him to use the Force and fire away into the Death Star, saving the galaxy. It's an incredible movie all around, with special effects that were groundbreaking at the time. It's so rewatchable, as are most of the Star Wars movies. It was actually my first PG movie, and so it will forever be a classic. And it's a personal favorite of all the Star Wars movies. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If there's another ranking of movies, or anything for that matter that you'd like to see, feel free to comment down below. Also, I'd love to see your list of all the Skywalker Saga movies. Please remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.